Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today I've got some fun tips for you and a cute card using some supplies from our sponsor Rubber Stamp Tapestry. You can find them online at pegstamps.com. First of all, though, I want to share some die cutting tips. And the main tip here is kind of getting some new use from your old dies. Now, this is an old Spellbinders die. You probably have some in your stash, and they have a nice thick border on both sides of where the cutting blade is. And the reason for that is because you can use these dies as a stencil. Did you know that? Well, it's really easy to do. I taped this down to a piece of cardstock so it wouldn't slip, and I made sure my tape only covered the outside of the die. The tape didn't go on the inside. And now I'm using a blending brush. You can use a sponge or whatever you like to use to apply some ink over the die. So that's going to give me a nice kind of rouged color on the inside of the die. Now I'm going to take a tissue here and wipe off any excess ink that's on top of my die. That way I don't get it into my die cutting machine. Now there you can see you get a beautiful white border and a nice soft colored inside, which is pretty on its own, but I'm going to show you another thing you can do. This is just plain old plastic canvas from the craft store. And if you like the look of the pierced and stitched dies that have been out on the market for the last couple of years, this tip is for you. You can do this with almost any die you have already, and the plastic canvas helps you line up the edges. Here I'm doing the straight edges with my needle tool and the plastic canvas, but a thumbtack will work just as well. Now another tip I have for you, my needle tool gets a lot of use in my craft room. I use it to stir up embossing powder. I use it to, apply glue to things. I get it grimy and gross, and I could feel as I was poking these holes that I had some burrs on the tool. What you can do if that happens is you can either take a whetstone if you have it and just file it down a little bit, just kind of drag it in one direction over the whetstone to sharpen it up and remove any gunk and burrs. Or if you don't have a whetstone, you can simply use a piece of sandpaper. And you can even go up to smoother, like less gritty sandpapers if you still feel like you have burrs on there. But that will get your needle tool working like new, because if it does have burrs or gunk on it, it could make the holes uneven or a little bit sloppy, which I think I had a little bit here. Now plastic canvas comes in circles as well as squares, and the circles are wonderful because then you can do round die cuts, you can do curved edges on some of your fancier die cuts. So it's almost like a French curve. It gives you all these different options if you have those two types of plastic canvas. See how easy it is to line up just a plain circle? I just put it down on my mat and I lay the plastic canvas over it until I have it lined up with one of the rows. And that looks really professional, I think. It looks almost as good as a die that has a stitching already. Sure, it takes a couple minutes, but I would rather do that than spend $30 on a set of dies that are just like another set I have just because it has holes. And this gives you the option to do this if you are just cutting your paper with a paper trimmer like I did for this panel, because it's bigger than any of my dies. Or if you need a size you don't have a die for, or if you have a circle cutter or some other means of cutting shapes that is not a die. You don't need to have a die cutter. You can totally get this look with what you have. Now, speaking of what you have, you can always trace things and cut them out by hand. Now, I'm tracing this roll of washi tape to give me a base for the wreath that I'm going to stamp using my peg stamps. Now, whenever you use peg stamps, I recommend that you start with your biggest stamp first. In this case, it's this sprig of lemon leaves. Isn't that nice? I like stamps like this because it fills a large area and you have some scale. You have different size leaves all in one stamp. But the stamp itself is big, so I'm starting off with this one. Now, each of the stamps have a little line on the side that helps line things up. I found it was much easier to stamp this wreath if I lined up the tip of the stem with the previous leaf. Now, after I got the leaves down, I decided to do the lemons because they're the next size up, and I just tucked them in randomly. And that's the key when you're doing a natural wreath like this, is you want it balanced, but you want it to feel random and natural. You don't want it to look like little soldiers standing around in a circle. You want them very natural. I decided to use rose ink for the lemon blossoms because I had picked up that rose foiled pattern paper for the background. I decided that it was too much pink after I did a little sponging and ink brushing on this panel, but that's okay because when you use dye ink, you can color over it with your alcohol-based markers. So I'm using a really pale yellow to color in my lemons, and this is a Copic marker, but any alcohol-based marker is going to be fine. And then I used a really, really pale marker for the lemon blossoms, which I think are actually a little bit purple anyway. Now, the smallest stamp in this stamp set is this little sprig of leaves, and they're very solid. I decided to do them in this kind of lime green ink because originally I thought I would do lemons and limes, but I didn't end up doing limes, so I thought, well, I'll use that ink on that. And I think it looked really cute. Now, before I made my card, I actually chose some paper to make an envelope because I'm making a square card and it's hard to find envelopes to fit them. So after I made my envelope, I took the scraps and I die cut some leaves and blossoms from it's actually a set that makes rolled flowers, but I thought, I could use them flat, stack them up, save some postage, and it would go good on this card. Because when you're making the three-dimensional flowers, you kind of have to hand deliver those cards or put them in a box. So I decided I would use my die in a different way, which I always recommend because if it's taking up space and you bought and paid for it, you might as well get as much use as you can. And I decided to use it a new way. So I'm layering up that piece of gold foiled paper. The pattern paper I'm using is by Close to My Heart. I won it. It was like a gift with purchase at a stamp show, and I thought it was a really pretty design. I'm not sure if it's available anymore. And then I just kind of played with my placement of my items before I stuck them down. A lot of times I'll put down my base layer, but then I'll wait to glue down my focal point and my embellishments until I've got everything ready. Now, this is a clay tool. If you don't have these, check your kids' clay bucket, Play-Doh bucket, because that's what this came from. I couldn't find my actual flower shaping tools. I don't know what I did with those, but this worked just fine. And even a marble, to press a marble on your leaves would work fine, or a bead, something like that, just so you can round them a little bit. And then I realized I wanted some texture on this card, so I had just enough of this Grossgrain ribbon, and I'm pretty sure it came from the dollar store, to embellish this panel. And I wanted to have a little knot and kind of little ends on each side, so I tied the ribbons together and then I tied it around so I could have a knot on each edge. Just be careful that you don't damage your cardstock when you're doing this. You might get it kind of set up and tied, and then you can pull it off the panel and finagle your knots a little bit to make sure they fit good and you're not bending the panel or damaging it. And sometimes one side will look better than the other, and you might just want to take it off and flip it around so that it looks just the way you want it. And then I use plenty of adhesive there, not foam tape on this layer. I just want to make sure I've got that stuck down really well, and I'm using my ATG tape, which is adequate for this. You can always use score tape if you feel like you need a little stronger of a bond, but this worked really well for me. And I'm just almost blunt cutting these. It's a very slight angle. You might want a little fray check if you're using Grossgrain ribbon, because I do think that does seem like it wants to fray where I'm not cutting it at a really sharp angle. But you can, usually Grossgrain won't fray, but I was feeling like that particular one felt like it wanted to fray. Then I used some foam tape to adhere this panel, kind of straddling the ribbon so that it would pop up a little bit and have some dimension. And now I'm going to decide how I want to put down my flowers and embellishments. Now that yellow probably is a little bit brighter than what would be ideal for this. Maybe I should have used like a cream cardstock, but it all coordinates, and everybody's got their own preferences. I did use a cranberry ink to do the thinking of you because the rose wasn't going to be strong enough, or I inked the background with that. And the glue I'm using here is called Helmar 450. Honestly, if my glue gun was plugged in, I would have used that. I love using my glue gun on cards, but the Helmar 450 is the next best thing. It just takes a while for that ink to that glue to come out. But to be fair, I'm kind of towards the bottom of that bottle, and I've been using that same bottle for years. So where other glues have dried up on me and just not lasted or solidified in the bottle after hardly any use, that one actually has stayed really good. So I just layered up my little shapes here. Now it's funny because this is meant to be a rolled carnation flower, but stacking it up with a little bit of dimension from puffing out the backs with our little ball end tool, I think it looks fine like this. It just looks like a different flower. It looks kind of like a primrose as opposed to a carnation. So look at your dies, or if you're thinking about buying dies, think about how many different ways you can use them. Instead of just looking at the demo on the package, flip it over, look at the dies, and see what else you can do. I used foam tape for the thinking of you so it would kind of pop it up and help it lay flat on the card. And there you can see the matching envelope. This was so much fun to make. It only used one stamp set and a sentiment I already had, and you can find that French lemonade stamp set at pegstamps.com. They're the home of Rubber Stamp Tapestry. I want to thank you so much for watching today. Please give me a thumbs up if you like this video, and until next time, happy crafting.